Good morning and welcome to our latest session on the buyer. This morning we're heading right down under to Australia for a debate on wine Victoria, looking at possibilities for Australian wine in general, but in particular Victoria wine region specifically. Just to help, before I introduce our panel, just to quickly set the scene, I think it's fair to say that over the last couple of years, there's definitely been, whisper it gently, a kind of a resurgence, I think, for Australia, particularly in premium wine, as buyers are, well, I think it's fair to say as Australia itself is perhaps reopening itself again to the idea of sending more wines to the UK. Perhaps its love affair with China is not quite as much as in love as they used to be. I think also buyers here are also looking for new possibilities for premium wine right around the world, and in particular in Australia, to fill some of the fine wine gaps that are now emerging due to sort of some of the problems in the old world. So yeah, perhaps Australia has another resurgence for Australia, which is a kind of the backdrop for today. In terms of Victoria itself, according to my esteemed research, and it's the second smallest state in Australia, but probably one of the most intense when it comes to winemaking. They have I think over 700 wineries, 25,000 hectares, and 21 different sub wine regions, which actually in themselves are quite famous in themselves. Places like the Yarra River and Mornington Peninsula. So one of the most diverse areas as well in Australia, with a wide range of soils, which means it is a kind of a part of Australia where virtually every grape variety can be grown successfully. And this morning we'll also be going through some wines and showing some examples as well. And the backdrop to all of this is that Victoria wine will be a key feature at this year's London Wine Fair, and there'll be a specific stand there and an opportunity to go and meet producers and taste wines specifically at the wine fair. So that's one to bear in mind as well. So to introduce our panel, thanks for everyone for joining us. We've got a mixture of buyers, merchants, importers and restaurateurs. In no particular order, can I introduce Stuart Mccloskey, who's the founder of Vinorium, who's award-winning specialist in Australian wine. So nice to see you, Stuart.
Thank you, Richard. Good morning.
Nice to have you here. We have Francis Bentley, who's the wine buyer at LWC Drinks. We have nice to see you. We have Kim Wilson, who's the managing director of North South Wines. So it's a bit like a Eurovision panel. We have Angela Mount, who's a wine consultant, wine buyer, wine writer. Former supermarket wine buyer. Nice to have you, Angela. Nice to see you. We have Victoria Sharples, who's sitting in her brand new wine bar in Highgate, which is the Swain's Wine Bar and Shop in Highgate. Thanks for sparing your time. Hopefully you won't have all those hordes of people waiting to come in when we finish.
No, it'll be fine.
We've got Roger Jones, restaurateur, Michelin star chef, and from the Harrow, Little Bedouin, who's also a wine buyer and now has his own sort of fine wine consultancy and buying wine. And Australia, I know, is one of his particular loves. And we have Jamie Wynne Griffiths, who's the founder of Propeller Wine Agency, which I'm sure he'll tell us about, which is a new model for wine importing to the UK. And joining us from Wine Victoria, we also have Stephanie Dubodin, who's the chair of Wine Victoria. So we've got quite a big panel. Nice to see you all. Thanks for everyone for coming. As I say, I think to help set the scene, before we dive into Victoria specifically, I think it'd be quite good to perhaps put in context where Australia currently sits in terms of the eyes of buyers here and what people think of in terms of premium Australia as opposed to main sort of mass market Australia, I guess. Can I continue, Victoria? I know that this is very, very, very close to your heart, Australia, obviously, but from your perspective, where would you put Australia in terms of context where it has been in the past
20 years?
Yeah.
back in 2005, I started importing Victorian wine to the UK. And that was at the height of where Australia really was a force to be reckoned with. You know, they had excellent wine, and I've seen it evolve through. I've always been on the premium side rather than supermarket, and I always knew that there's a lot of potential. And I think I've seen Australia go from being, you know, the darling of the wine world to well, there wasn't much around. Suddenly, a lot of the premium wines weren't coming across to us, coming to the UK. And I'm seeing a resurgence now, and there's more interest. And I agree, as you say, with China. You know, I think Australia as a whole, there's some Margaret River, your classic regions have a lot to offer. But I think Victoria, I mean, I am biased by name and nature, but I think Victoria is my, you know, desert island region that has so much potential to offer, because it does have everything from sparkling all the way through to sweet. And I think it's something that's been overlooked because South Australia's been a lot more shouty than Victoria ever has been. And the nature of the industry there is quite different, because Victoria is a lot of small producers. We don't have the large conglomerates that can really push the marketing side. So, I mean, I think this is like coming home for me today. It's a real treat, because there's so many friends that, you know, that we're going to have a look at today. Which I think
excellent. Okay, well, that's a great start. The desert island of wine. That's a nice desert island region of wine. Stuart, can I come to you? I mean, obviously you specialise in Australian wine, so your love affair of Australia is never dimmed. But well, perhaps if you explain why did you choose Australia as your sort of specialist for Vinorium, and where do you see the rest of the market in terms of their perception of Australia at the moment?
Sure. I mean, I started out as a young boy, really. I sort of brought up in a family, a non-drinking family, by my father, who was Irish, drunk Guinness, but I was never around wine as a kid, but I really got into buying Aussie wines as a sort of 17, 18-year-old, and sort of carried on my love affair even during when I was in the army. And it never stopped, to be honest, really. And I just sort of latched onto some producers, and just sort of took it from there and loved it. And then, you know, to sort of cut a long story short, when we created the Vinorium back in which is the retail division, now solely how we run the company, you know, I bought quite a few producers back that I was buying as a 17, 18-year-old, you know, which was lovely, John's Blend and all sorts of stuff. And now we import from 45 producers at the moment from Australia, where they're dedicated agent. We bring in 350 different labels from those 45 producers. And I think the circumstances are slightly better in the world with Brexit and what we're now seeing with sort of Ukraine and all the impact of shipping and pricing. I think our portfolio is sitting at maybe 70, 75 to this day. But for us, when we looked at all the statistics from our sort of day-to-day sales, it was a lot of, I wouldn't call it old guard customers, but I think customers touch older than me were really loving seeing some of the old names coming back. As I said, the likes of John's Blend and all sorts of people like that. And then we took a decision: you're either sort of a jack of all trades as a wine importer or a wine merchant, or you specialize. So we, you know, overnight we took a hard decision to say, okay, we'll start delisting pretty much the rest of the world, and we will just focus solely on Australian wines. And you know, we sell in Aussie dollars $5 million a year of Australian wine, maybe a little bit more. Our average retail per bottle in Aussie dollars again is $54 a bottle, so you know, low to mid 30s, and those statistics haven't changed in the last 5 years. And we find that customers really are not afraid to spend 30, and that's an average. You think over 300 different wines in our shop or online all sit above £30 a bottle. We have very few wines that actually sit below 20. We actually struggle to find wines of, you know, good quality at that level, to be honest, really. But more importantly, the demand isn't there for us. It really sits in the premium level, and it's just getting, well, let's say before the Ukrainian war, it's just getting stronger and stronger and stronger. So it's fantastic for us. So long live Australia.
And you're selling into merchants and the on-trades?
We are selling, I mean, again, slightly different to an importer. We sort of specialize with private clients. So we have 3,500 roughly in the United Kingdom, and we had about 1,000 in the EU, and we could deliver our full range portfolio next day. anywhere in the United Kingdom, and door to door into the EU roughly in 48 hours. But post-Brexit, EU stopped for us. But I would say that 90% of our sales are to private clients, but we've just launched a big new e-commerce platform. So we're going to basically tackle all 900 indies now with our range of wines.
Okay, great. Well, we'll come back and talk to you a little bit more about which regions and where Victoria sits within that. Angela, can I come to you? I mean, obviously with your wine buying experience, I guess you've seen Australia's ups, downs, ins and outs. I mean, where would you position Australia at the moment?
Well, it's been very interesting, preparing for this and looking back, because obviously, I headed up the wine team at one of the big supermarkets for more years than I care to remember. But then I've also worked as a consultant with wine merchants and independents, and also bought wine for the on-trade. I've just made a note here. I think I agree with everything that's been said so far. And of course, I'll always take it slightly from a supermarket perspective. The Australian boom happened, in the biggest time was the 90s. And if I just put a retail buying hat on for a moment, as opposed to the premium, the indies, the on-trade, it was awash with easy drinking wines, easy to pronounce. It did, in some respects, what a New Zealand region and brand and great variety did. It did what Marlborough Sauvignon did, but years later. And I think that the big problem, and I think still partly, is for the mainstream wine consumer. The 70% of wine drinkers who do buy in supermarkets, and I'm coming on to premium in a minute, it's how they had it so easy in terms of accessibility. As Victoria said, the big brands chucking money at it, and they got used to being able to buy at a certain price point. And because the brand marketing never, I always use the analogy, if you're buying a car, you know why you're paying more for a BMW than for a Skoda. Apologies to anyone who's got either of those. And you understand the reason. At that time, and I would say well into the early, noughties, people didn't understand why they needed to pay more for Australian wine, because they were quite comfortable. But then that changed. And I think then, the wines we've got here, I know them well. I've worked with a wine merchant who sells or sold all of them. And that's where you've got your very, very interested parties. But I think, and similarly with restaurants, if I talk to the restaurants, I don't know what Roger's going to say, but it's very easy to sell to the consumer, because ultimately it's all about the consumer, to sell different regions of France, premium France. But it's less easy to sell premium Australia or Victoria. And yet Victoria, as Victoria said, has just got such an abundance, such a wealth of opportunities. So I think a lot of it is about education, and it's also a great deal about educating not the consumers from the late 90s and the 2000 to 2010, because they were in it. It's about grabbing hold of the millennials and soon to be the Generation Z, and communicating and educating them as to why these wines are so different and premium. And the final thing I'd say, I think what is very reassuring is that retailers, having been to some of the press tastings recently, not necessarily in Australia, but also in Australia, are upping their game. They're pushing the price levels up, and consumers are trusting them and understanding them.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. Well, as I said, I think also that's perception as well in there of Australian wine, which isn't necessarily always as in tune with what is actually being made in Australia. Francis, can I come to you? I know you've only recently joined LWC Drinks, but in terms of where Australia sits within the business, and your own sort of interpretation of where Australia.
Well, I've been an on-trade buyer for quite some time now, so I can talk about that in general.
Yeah.
I feel that one of the main things that Australia offers is the breadth and the variety, both in terms of price points, but in terms of varietal choice. And I feel that another big thing that is very important to the off-trade, the on-trade, is price stability. At a time when we're seeing prices zoom all over the shop in the majority of other countries, I'm finding that Australia is particularly stable, which is really good to see. I mean, obviously we're still having the pressures from dry goods and shipping, but those are sort of manageable when you know what you're getting in terms of the wine itself. I think it's consistency of product as well, because of the climate in Australia. We tend to find that vintage to vintage, it can be pretty stable, especially at the lower end, but also you see that at the premium end, even then, people find it understandable, and they like that continuity, that thread that they always get. They know the product that they're going to buy, which is something that we can't really get from a lot of regions of the world. I think that the other thing that's really important with Australia now as well is that we've gone from the days when people associated Australian premium wine with incredibly alcoholic, big tannic reds. And now we have that breadth, that appealing, the fresh lighter whites, the fresher reds. Those fresher reds are really important in the on-trade now. People want lighter, fresher, more elegant styles. And that is what we're getting in terms of the choice that we now have from Australia. And that's really important. I think Angela touched as well on the clarity of labeling. That really helps us, because we're selling from your dog and duck all the way up to premium hotels and restaurants. And we have to be able to offer something to everybody. And Australia can do all of that and more.
Excellent. Okay. And do you find that perception message is very much understood by the buyers that you're selling to in the on-trade in terms of what wines are available from Australia, the fresher styles?
Look, I'd always like them to know more. It would always be nicer if the customers knew more about what they were wanting from us, but it's our job to be able to educate them. You know, we're the experts apparently, and we need to be able to communicate what we have and what they and how what we have fills their needs. And I think that because the consumer, the end consumer in the restaurant, is wanting these styles of wines, but they're wanting to be able to understand it, Australia really does fill that hole very neatly. I think that because I grew up in the odd bins days, yeah. So I was in odd bins when we were stocking premium wines from Mornington and Geelong and Yarra, and I think that there is a reception. Like, I don't think that these are new wine areas to people anymore. They've grown up with them. You know, people of my generation understand Australia as a premium winemaking region. They don't need to be introduced to it in the same way that that maybe they would have done 10 years ago.
Okay, excellent, thank you. Kim, you're also I guess serving both sides of the market, the mainstream and also the premium end. Where does Australia sit within your portfolio? And
I would be wrong if I didn't say very important with De Bortley being a shareholder in our business. So yeah, De Bortley is a shareholder in our business, and we've been working with them for 8 years. We're very fortunate there. They acquired a new estate in Rutherglen. I think it was late 2018. So they cover about 820 hectares now. So they've got quite a big site as far as Victoria goes, sourcing from King, from Heathcote, Yarra to Rutherglen. So there's a very big array of what we've got. And I suppose the biggest challenge we've got is that I echo some of the stuff that Angela was saying, is that we work on both sides of the market. We work with the supermarkets, but then we also work with wholesalers and premium single site stores and indies. And from a supermarket side, I can't tell you how disappointing it is sometimes, because there are such great wines out there and varietals and styles that from Victoria that from a price point of view just haven't worked in the past, because of where they've sat and obviously the relationship with China and availability that was there. But definitely we're going into a bit of a project with De Bortley at the moment of how we can push this stuff forward and make it more accessible to the larger market. But then also working with our wholesalers and our indies for what we do there and sourcing what we do there. So mainly that is around the Yarra Valley, and we're starting to bring in some of the Ruther Glen stuff as well from Ruther Glen Estate that they bought on. So yeah, I'm quite fortunate. I have a big like sweet shop to play with, and just need lots of people to sell it to, really. But yeah, definitely from our side of things, it's an important part of the portfolio. For me personally, Steve Webber's A5 Chardonnay is one of my favourite wines in the world. So yeah, I'm a big fan, and I know my team's a big fan of the Yarra Valley too. So
yeah, great. Well, and it's actually noticeable. Actually, I mean, obviously, Wine Australia does a great job in terms of all the various different webinars and seminars and all the things it was doing during lockdown. But it does seem as though a number of the other state wine bodies, like Wine Victoria, are taking up the reins, as it were, as well to promote themselves more here, which is very encouraging. So, Roger, can I ask you? I mean, I know.
Yeah. So we're very grateful to Australia because our success as a restaurant was down to Australia. We listed over 350 wines from Australia, all premium. The reason we chose Australian was simply the wording was so much easier. And the idea when we opened our restaurant was to provide something which was more relaxed than a smart, posh place in London. And the biggest problem we'd been or encountered was sommeliers saying, would you like X or Y in a German accent or a French accent? I can't speak German or French, so I was hopeless with those sort of words. And I wanted people to be at ease in our restaurant, and Australia was the easiest way forward. We started using premium from the start because supermarkets were doing the cheaper versions. I think we first started listing Aussie wines in 1998. So as Angela said, everyone was drinking all the cheap stuff then, and we saw an insight into premium wines. And I think one of the big things for us was the Australians were coming over and knocking on the door, and great companies like Great Western Wine, which Angela knows, were bringing these people over. And one of the things we noticed that people, after a while at their restaurant, they were coming in and naming areas. So they'd say that we want a Chardonnay from Mornington, we want Pinot or a Syrah from Yarra. But I think even now, if you ask people, they wouldn't know about Victoria. They would know all the regions, yeah, but the name Victoria to them would be oblivious. People talk about Margaret River, and they would talk about Chardonnay and Pinot and Cab. But I think Victoria, because it's such a range of different, and that's a bonus of different styles which are made there, and it's fabulous, from amazing stickies to, you know, amazing Chardonnays from Mornington, and you know, you can go on and on. And I think that's a slight problem in that, because the diversity of it, we need an overboard like Victoria to sort of describe the whole thing, because there's too many things happening in the area to explain to people generally. So you wouldn't say people go to Victoria to buy X, because each area is so different. And maybe later on we can hear what the board are doing to encourage or celebrate the diversity of Victoria.
Yeah, because that's a big strength. The fact that you mentioned Yara and Monte Peninsula and other sub-regions as being such strong brands in themselves. But we'll definitely explore that as we go along. Actually, just get a bit of background noise. Actually, so if you're not speaking, would you mind just putting your mute button on, and then when you do speak, obviously take it off. Jamie, sorry to come to you last. We've got a bit,
not at all.
Where does Australia sit within Propeller, and what's your thoughts on where the opportunities are for Australia at the moment?
Interestingly, Australia's been sort of the slower to come to the fore in terms of what we're doing, although Australian producers are fairly adept and fairly familiar with unusual models because, well, they invented a lot of them and practiced them in export markets, not least the US. But we're doing now 2 quite large projects, so from not a lot to two very big things. One with a group of wineries under Periscope management, who are all family-owned, boutique-y, holiday 5-star kind of places that have never been in the UK before. And there's a 40-footer that's about to leave Melbourne with those guys on board. And then at the other end of the scale, a very commercial proposition, a Victorian producer who sampled some wines with us a few months back and said, what do you think? What can we do? And we said we don't like the wines at all. There are all sorts of problems with this, that, and the other. We're very constructive and polite, obviously, but kind of expecting a sort of, okay, well, see you later type response. But actually they rolled up their sleeves and go, okay, well, what's wrong? Can we do a benchmark? Can we understand where the opportunity is? So just last week we lined up a benchmark of all the wines that they're proposing to bring to the UK, put them against all the incumbents pretty exhaustively, and had a really constructive session. So it's going to be a longer term project, but we're going to shape what they do for the UK and hopefully to the benefit of other export markets for them as well. And that attitude from them was really refreshing, and they're a lot of fun to work with. I think in terms of the specific opportunities, I mean, we've all touched on it, the nomenclature and the branding, the approachability and the sort of inherent sense of fun that comes through a lot throughout, the Australian category, is absolutely a strength, and helps sort of navigate people through things like regionality, which the average person on the street, if you were to talk about Australian regionality, they go, well, it's Shiraz and it's Chardonnay and there's some other stuff. I mean, of course, there are more adept consumers, but there is still much education to be done. But other ways of achieving it, talking about Claire Riesling in a different way, as in a more branded sense than rather specifically about the regionality or the age or the petrol or the whatever it might be, can be very useful. And I think there are sort of pros and cons to the Chinese situation, which is that certainly things like Penfolds, producers like Penfolds are very present in investing in the market, and access to those wines for lots of people is definitely a good thing. But equally, at the other end of the portfolio from those large companies, there is a lot of the less than savoury, very, very commercial wines, which, alongside our addiction to bulk, and of course some of those are bulk packed in the UK in any case, kind of clouds the picture a little bit in terms of that premium conversation. But what we've certainly seen from the indies we're talking to, just because we're kind of warming them up to our Periscope project, is that there are some fantastic names that have been here for a long, long time with some great agents who continue to make wine and continue to innovate and do great labels. But there is a little bit of fatigue around the familiarity of some of those names, and a desire to have something a bit different. And Australia, as we've touched on, in terms of diversity, in terms of regionality, in terms of varietals, styles, etc., and a willingness to embrace lighter styles, lower alcohol, no alcohol, all these things. Australia's got a phenomenal opportunity at its feet now.
It's great that you said that the producer you're talking to is willing to make those changes for you, which is an indication of how keen they are to. Coming back to Stephanie, I'm just sorry to keep you waiting all this time, but I wanted to try and get all the panelists to give their views on Australia in general and Victoria. But can I obviously introduce yourself and how would you position Victoria in terms of the context of Australia and for this debate?
Sure. So I'm Stephanie, the chair of Wine Victoria. I mean, I think in terms of where Victorian wine positions in the whole of Australia, I think what is quite unique about us, and I'm sitting here in Victoria, and I'm sitting here in the Macedon Ranges, which is the highest. It's the highest part Victorian. It's highest vineyards in mainland Australia. So we sort of have the whole gamut in Victoria, from very cool climate, a lot of maritime influence across the lower regions in Victoria, through to a lot of more continental type climate. So it is pretty diverse, and as was mentioned before, we're very unique in that we can produce from sparkling through to have an incredible old heritage with sticky wines through the whole sort of gamut. And I think I think that's what's quite unique about what Victoria does. I actually, showing my age, but I lived in the UK like many Australians in the late 90s and early 2000s. So certainly hearing about obviously when Australian wine sort of had a bit of a huge peak then, and it's obviously fantastic to it was an enormously different sort of array of wine that was really doing well back then. So I think it's interesting timings with Australian wine. We've sort of been around long enough in terms of people's understanding, but also to sort of then start to a bit of a tipping point, looking beyond what has been purchased before and looking beyond into some more of those sort of cooler climate expressions that we can do very well, and can produce fabulous Pinots through to very linear and very Chardonnays with great finesse. So I think and one part that Victorian's quite interesting as well. We have we're sort of the home to, as much as we have larger producers as well, but we have the largest concentration of small and family owned and artisan wine producers. And even sort of the garages producers, a lot of them are coming from Victoria. So it's an area, as I said, 21 wine regions. So it's no surprise to hear before, sort of in terms of which regions have most awareness. There's obviously going to always be a lot of work to do for everyone to be fully aware across all 21. But yeah, it's a good opportunity today to really sort of demonstrate the depth of what Victoria has on offer.
And is it fair to say that there's more of a refocus from Victoria or region like Victoria for markets like the UK, or is there always been that desire to export it? Or would you say there's more, because of obvious reasons, to kind of realign itself and show more of these wines back to the UK buyers?
Yeah, I mean, the UK has always been an incredibly important market, and I mean, obviously the China impact is significant in Australia. However, it, obviously not, a huge proportion of wine producers weren't exporting to China, even though it was a phenomenal amount of wine. A lot of it was coming from quite a few big major players as well. So, UK has always been a main, focus for Australian for export, and it just remains so. And I just think, as we've discussed before, it's a great, I love when things are a bit of tipping points too, and it's great when there's a bit of a tipping point change in terms of, sort of new opportunities and consumer sort of sentiment towards, wanting to seek out more sort of premium Australian wines and being really receptive to that and looking for other varieties that they may not have looked to for Australian wines.
Okay. Can I just open it up now to the panel, just in terms of, like we've mentioned there, this issue, well, is it an issue or is it not an issue? The fact that you've got Victoria as the state, and then you've got all the sort of 21 sub-regions. I mean, do we see that as an advantage for that area as opposed to other parts of Australia which may be more you know, it's the McLaren Vale, or it's Margaret River, as opposed to the Yarra Valley within Victoria. I don't know. Angela, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, while I was listening to this, I think it goes back, and I will keep banging on about education and communication. I think if you went to any consumer, any person, well, the majority, be they, you know, supermarket wine purchasers or premium, actually, how many of them would know that Melbourne, which everyone knows Melbourne, how many know it's in Victoria? I think one of the big issues is not the word Victoria, but the awareness of Victoria. I would say a huge amount of people know that Chianti comes from Tuscany. Within Victoria, you have, as everyone said, such a diversity. You know, you've got well-established, you've got Mornington Peninsula, you've got so many regions, just as you have Coonawarra, just as you have Hunter, just as you have, people have heard of those, people have heard of Mornington Peninsula, people have heard of Yarra. Do they actually know they're in Victoria?
Yeah.
I think that's...
Victoria, can I ask you?
Yes, yes, you can. I think...
Do you have sub-regions yourself?
I know them well. I've hosted wine tours and done a lot of work within Victoria. And I happen to know where Victoria is. I mean, with my experience, a lot of people, it's more on a marketing side. You've got, I was just thinking, you know, when I was working with Wines of Australia, you know, Victorian wineries hardly had a say because it was all the big boys who really dominated. Now you've got, and I'm so thrilled that Wineries of Victoria pulled out their, you know, put their finger out and actually having a go and coming to the UK, because as a state, because it is quite disparate, you've got these 21 with a couple of extra sub-regions there. They don't necessarily all talk to each other. They've got different forms of funding. So if you've got Wineries of Victoria to actually bring it together and make an impact here, I think it's really important, because otherwise you're going to be limiting to it'll only be Mornington Peninsula or just Yarra. And I think with what, there's too much to offer. And I know there's lots of banter about China. And yeah, as Stephanie said, most of the wines that Victoria produces wouldn't have been going to China in any case. I think what it's done is it's allowed people to, Australia's become more of a refocus, and now Victoria can tap into that and say, hang on, we're here as well. And, you know, it becomes a method or a vehicle to promote all those 21. So you're not just getting one brand per se.
Yeah. Francis, can I, go on, Roger, you got your hand up. I'll
Sorry,
let Roger go first.
I'm old enough to remember when Wine Australia had an issue where there were guys who would not be part of it, and you had two things in the UK. You had Wine Australia, and then you had the separate guys who wouldn't join them, and then everyone thought it wouldn't work, but it did in the end. And through people like Yvonne, it changed completely, and everyone joined Wine Australia. So I don't think it's an issue. It's just getting, you know, people aware of things. I mean, obviously people like Morning Peninsula have their own roadshow and things, which they've always done and always come to the UK. But it's only, I suppose, a matter of trying to get everyone working as a team and highlight the diversity of the area. But I think also, as Angela said, people don't know Australia, the map, and maybe it's showcasing the map where Melbourne is and where all the regions around it, and on your website possibly make it more friendly towards consumers, as opposed to, it's quite geeky at the moment. So I know that your AGM took 42 minutes last year, but it doesn't really show all the regions as a whole if you're going into it. And I think it will work, and it can do, and it just gives another story to shout about Australia.
Roger, there was many years ago, Victoria had a really great marketing program where it showed a jigsaw of all the different regions in Victoria. I mean, I remember that really fondly. I don't know what happened to it, but that actually gives you, it said such a great story. And I don't know what you guys are thinking of doing, but I think that would actually really, something like that, I think gives exactly what you're saying, that sort of sense of place and location.
Yeah, well, I went to see a mate of mine in Melbourne a few years ago, and he said, "Do you want to do a day trip to a wine region?" And then I didn't. Well, when they get into Yarra Valley, Mornington Peninsula, and I was like, "Oh my god, I didn't realise they were actually there." So I have to hold my hand up for that. Francis, can I ask you as a buyer? I mean, how important is it to have this kind of level of support from an actual wine body to help you better understand the region, or do you find yourself, it's kind of like, well, your job to delve into Victoria and find out?
I'm going to be honest, I have very little contact with generic bodies at all. I'm not entirely sure they're interested in us. But I also think that Victoria as a region, I'm going to be blunt, isn't important to the consumer. They're interested in the sub-regions within it for the specific reasons that they know Mornington Peninsula for what they know it for. You know, I don't think that they understand it's part of Victoria. I think we've agreed on that, but I'm not sure how important that is to the consumer as a whole. I think it's important from our perspective to understand how they all knit together, and it's important for the wineries to be able to access the funding and to market together and to be able to organize themselves, because as we've discussed as well, they're smaller wineries who don't necessarily have an export director who can get them into trade shows abroad and so on. So I think from that perspective, it's very crucial. But from consumers, it makes no difference.
Yeah,
Can I?
Yeah, of course, right. Yeah.
Can I just say, I think, yeah, and everyone makes very valid points. And I think what Victoria said was spot on. And that is what our, the objective is as well for us. It's like, we do realise that, we're not here to promote sort of the region of Victoria itself. We're here to promote the regions within, and Wine Victoria, sort of we become the vehicle able to collectively do that. And what I was meaning about Victoria made a really good point. It's like, obviously there's certain regions that already have really strong awareness, and it's, by us collectively doing this together, it gives the opportunity to a lot of the other smaller regions. I'm trying to think of
the generics who do it well and do consumer engagement really well, and I think it's Wines of Rioja and possibly Côte d'Rône. I think are the two who have really done a really good job engaging with the public, because they make it about more than the wine, and they take it into food and they take it into culture.
Côte d'Rône, I totally agree.
And I think especially Wines of Rioja have done a stunning job, and I genuinely don't know who has done it, but hats off to them. But I don't think it's a Wines of Victoria problem. I think that this is a problem that generics have, is that I don't quite, sometimes I don't know who they're trying to target or what the agenda really is, because I never see them. Maybe they just hate me and I smell, but
perhaps more about,
it's trying to agree on the messaging and what we're trying to achieve. And I think you're right, Stephanie. I think the only way you can win with this project is if you look at the sub-regions and you work out what each region is trying to achieve, really, I guess. Have I taken this in a tangent? I'm really sorry.
No. I think that's what's interesting though is actually access to wines. I think is also by having a generic approach means potentially there are more producers being able to show their wines under a Victoria hat, as it were. But I guess Stuart, is that you're obviously working with Australia all the time. I mean, are you is that part of your challenge or opportunities to actually be able to access more wines and to see more producers who are willing to send their wines here?
Absolutely. I agree with Francis. As I said, we import 40 from 45 different producers. I think we've got to be the biggest in the UK. Over the course of the last 5 years, we've imported and sold 500,000 bottles from Australia, $27 million. But with the exception of the Margaret River, we have zero contact with all regional bodies. None. No, not a single one has ever reached out to us, barring the Margaret River. And we did a big project with them last year. So it's a little odd, to be honest, really. But
when you're finding new wineries, is it a case of them contacting you directly, or are you going out and doing a search?
A bit of both, to be honest, really. When we started off going to them, but now it's them coming to us, essentially. So I would say we get sort of contacted 5 or 10 emails a week on average. We may have, our sample room, you should go and have a look. We've got maybe 400 or 500 new samples in there, all from Australia and from all regions. And it's just constantly just sent over. Would love to work with you. This is what we do, and all sorts of bits and bobs, essentially. And I suppose word spreads. We do well by our producers, so they're all close friends, essentially, even from region to region. Give Stuart a call, and samples just turn up at the door. Sometimes it's 24 bottles to crack on with, and we weren't even expecting them. Let us know, mate.
Party at your house then, yeah?
Sorry?
Party at yours then, yeah?
Brilliant. It's really, really, really good. It's fantastic. Yeah, we did a recent one with the Margaret River, and that was 90 samples turned up. But
is that, can I ask the rest of the panel, is that something which you're looking for as well? Is to be able to see more wines coming through from different regions from Victoria?
I had contact with Wines of Austria recently, and they said, what do you do in terms of Austrian wine? And I said, virtually nothing. And they said, can we send you 10 wineries that are looking for representation? And that can be quite powerful, because even if I don't take any of those wineries, you learn a huge amount about that, because the regional body there was doing its job in terms of it was giving me a snapshot of what they thought was relevant to us. And it wasn't a hard sell, but it also was an educational piece for me. So even if nothing there suited me, or I didn't want to go with any of those, I knew more about what I could go back to them and say, okay, not these, but something like this. Yeah. So look at and I think that's really helpful.
Yeah, well, I think that's part of what today's about, and obviously we've got the wines that are coming to you, and which are seen as a snapshot of the region as well. I mean, Jamie, I guess you're always looking for new wines, aren't you? Is that important for you to be able to have access to new wineries coming to you?
Yeah, I mean, we're fortunate in that most of the wineries come to us. They've seen lovely articles written by you, not least Richard, because you are our chief matchmaker. And producers come through the process fairly swiftly. But what I would say in terms of how some generics operate over others, and this isn't sort of a critique of specific generics, but the problem with a lot of generics is that they're very generic, and they have all sorts of rules governing how they promote individual wineries, which prevent them from backing certain producers over others, or backing specific producers. So in the extreme circumstances, they might support a tasting where there are no labels, because then they'll be completely non-partisan, and that's still true of some of the Spanish consejos. But the other thing in terms of those promotions is this kind of a real chicken and egg. It's kind of you want to promote some wines to get them here, but if they're not here, you can't promote them. So from a generic point of view, we love doing that, because our model allows generics to do exactly that, to get some stock into the market, to then promote, to then find producers for, distributors for. And equally, things like wines of Rioja and Côte d'Rône, as Francis said it quite rightly, they work a treat, because they're so present here, and they're huge brands, as well as regions stroke appellations. So yeah, I've rambled a bit. Does that answer your question, Rich? Sort of.
Yeah. I think let's move on from the generic side of things and look at the actual wines themselves, or the actual wine styles. I know not everyone's got all the wines in front of them, but perhaps if we start looking at, say, something like the Chardonnay and what Victoria can do in terms of Chardonnay. We've got an example here with Mac Forbes from the Yarra Valley. I mean, do you want to perhaps, Siobhan, could you perhaps, just in terms of Stephanie, sorry, could you perhaps just in terms of where Chardonnay sits within Victoria and this particular example?
Yeah, well, I think with this, I mean, I'm probably sure quite a few people on the panel, maybe everyone is familiar with Mac Forbes. He's with this particular Chardonnay. So this is from the Yarra Valley. And I mean, Chardonnay is one of those ones that is probably one of the most diverse varieties across Victoria, in terms that, you know, this is more of a cool climate example, but we have all the way up sort of in Beechworth, which is a warmer climate area. So, and across many of the regions. But Mac Forbes is, you know, he is a bit of a rock star winemaker in Victoria, and he's probably one of the biggest proponents for and spokespeople for terroir, which I know talking about terroir is nothing new, but he's very much, it's a very quintessential example of the Yarra Valley Chardonnay. It's his entry level Chardonnay, but I think it has great balance, elegance, and finesse. This particular Chardonnay. How did everybody else? Obviously, in comparison within Victorian styles, it's quite a lean Chardonnay, I think, compared to some of the other warmer regions.
Yeah, any thoughts on Chardonnay from Victoria or from the Yarra in particular? I mean, Kim?
For me, I really enjoyed this. I love Yarra Valley Chardonnay, and I love that steely, citrusy style that you get in that slightly like kind of matte strike. And I think with what's going on in the world here at the moment, and shortage of vintages for Europe and particularly Burgundy as well, I think you know, for me it's a really nice example, and something that we definitely as a company are trying to get people to try more, that, you know, if they're very driven towards that old world style, is getting stuff like Yarra Valley Chardonnay and Yarra Valley Pinot in front of them, and definitely from some of the supermarket side of things as well, trying to get that in front of them as well, and realize that it's a really, really great value for money compared to some of the other stuff that either isn't available or they're paying much more money from. So yeah, a huge fan of Yarra Chardonnay, and this didn't disappoint either, so it was really nice.
I think I'll sort of come in if I don't mind. Private clients are totally different. We put together a 4.5 year report, which we put into Australia last year. It was based on 400,000 bottle sales, split down by vintage and varietal and region, of which basically you're looking about almost 76% of our sales was Shiraz. And when you really look at it into hard detail, what we've actually found with our private clients, and that's spread right across Europe, so it would have been about 4,500 private clients. They're looking for richer, more mouthfeel, what's very fashionable in whether it's the Margaret River or in the Yarra Valley, this linear style. Actually, direct to consumers really don't like it. And it really is very obvious when it comes to our sales. And I'll give an example. So we work with Little Reddy, Pat, and he produced this epically good A Chardonnay from Beechworth. He only produced half a barrel. No, he produced a barrel and we got half a barrel. But it's quite rich in style, really good texture. It's fantastic. We sold out in one evening. Gone, finished. Thanks very much. 35 quid a bottle. We work with people like Moulin. So they'll pick from the Macedon ranges, the two guys there. And particularly in vintages that are hard, like 2020, very linear, low alcohol levels, 11.5%, 12%. They're struggling, to be honest, really. And I think it's fascinating to listen to you guys from a restaurant perspective in the supermarket. When it comes to direct to consumer, which is what we do, really zero. It's literally, we could delist, we've always said about 150 wines from our list, all cool climate styles, those linear styles, and it would actually have no negative impact on sales. It will just free up more cash in our bank. So consumers are very different.
Angela, I think it changes totally from, you know, your sector of the market to the more mainstream. And I think we also have to bear in mind the trend towards lighter, fresher. And I think what Kim said is absolutely relevant. There is a big trend. I think, Jamie, you mentioned it, you know, on the no low side, lower, fresher, lighter.
Yeah.
And
we actually don't see that trend, Angela. There's zero trend here.
But generally, if you look at UK stats, that is what's happening. I'm not talking about, you know, your particular sector, and of course it will be diverse. But I think one of the one of the problems but opportunities with, you know, as we've been saying, these leaner, fresher styles of Chardonnay, and Chardonnay is coming back. When was it? It was about the mid 2006, 2007. No one wanted Chardonnay. It was the ABC.
And these are the styles that you give people that kind of trick them into drinking
Yes,
Chardonnay
exactly.
again, but they'll say no. And
exactly. So it's a communication thing of identifying, and maybe this is something that I don't know, supermarkets, indies will pick up more on in terms of communicating to the consumer that with, you know, the issues in Burgundy, with the prices on Burgundy, these are alternatives. But again, and I'm sorry, I'll always go back to the consumer, because ultimately they're the ones buying the products. They need to understand that, and it's about getting that message across very clearly, I think.
Yeah. What's your thoughts on? I mean, obviously, you buy a lot of Australian Chardonnay. In terms of the Yarra Valley, what are you looking for from there, or from Victoria in general?
Well, again, I've seen more people looking for the leaner style, although we do have people who want, you know, a bit more texture and things in it. But to get people to buy Australian wine at the moment, they want, well, it's the lean, clean, lower alcohol wines that people are going for, and that's just my customers and, you know, my ex-customers who are now buying wines from me, and these are the people who used to drink big heavy wines and are now changing.
Victoria?
And Roger, can I ask Roger, in terms of what do you think in terms of, you know, pairings with food friendliness with the lighter styles and how that works?
Well,
compared to the large robust
food and wine goes in tandem. So we're all now eating less meat. A lot of us are eating vegan, whether it's part-time and also a lot of people are going more vegetarian. So that is transformed exactly into wine, where as we're eating lighter foods, we're looking for lighter wines. And that clearly goes in history. As we change the styles of food we're having, wine goes with it. So it's the same, and it goes through the same system. But of course, there are some people who still eat, you know, big, huge steaks, and there's famous restaurants in London which still sell them, and they sell huge Californian wines to go with it. But in general, and just like before we shut our restaurant, our food was getting much lighter, and we were even doing 8-course vegan tasting menus because the demand was there, and very few restaurants or vegan restaurants have a good or had a good wine list. So we gained a huge amount of new customers who were vegans who drank wine, who had nowhere to go to drink otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Victoria, can I ask you in terms of your views on?
I mean, for me, because I've sat on all sides of the fence, from blending to buying, and now with wine bar and store, and my market is they're 25 plus, they're probably 28, 30-year-olds. The majority of people want lighter, fresher. There's, I'd say, 200 customers want that big, bold, rich, heavy, oaky style. I think the major challenge that I've seen in the past is that when you've got Chardonnay coming from cool climate Australia or Pinot Noir cool climate Australia, and how does it sit next to Burgundy? Because it's always a price issue more than anything, rather than stylistic. And I think now there's that opportunity, as long as the exchange rate settles down. And with the, as Angela mentioned, you know, the pricing now in Burgundy is not consistent. I think there's a great opportunity. And you look at something like Max Chardonnay, and it has a very, you know, it has that minerally savory undertone that is not unusual in Burgundy. So I think there's a lot of similarities there. And I also think that when you're, I think, you know, there's so many new regions or new areas of wines coming into the UK now, whether it's Slovenia or whatever, people are more open to try something they've never heard of if it's coming from Eastern Europe. If it's coming from Australia, they're a bit like, oh, I don't know, or they don't expect it. And I think the one thing I find to help people navigate through this is okay, it's not Chardonnay, but a wine might be a bit like Chardonnay, or it's a bit like a Sauvignon Blanc. So if it's a Marsanne or whatever varietal that people are not used to, you can use that as a really clever navigation to help people understand what it is that they're trying. But I think that the leaner, fresher, lower alcohol, yes, some people still like big and buttery. Actually, what they want is they just want a bit of savoury oak. They don't necessarily want the big butter and heaviness.
I think like oak for texture, that's a big thing that we get a comment about, is oak for texture and finesse.
And it'll just really probably be more about lees than oak.
Can we just look at the Pinot Noirs? I mean, again, I appreciate you haven't all got the wines, so perhaps we'll just talk about the Pinot Noirs in general in terms of, I mean, the examples here, I think are both.
We haven't had the Marsanne, but I'm just, but you know, that's okay. I was just going to skip. Did you want to have a chat at all about
I'm just aware of our time and the fact that most of them some people haven't got the wines with them. So
yeah, okay.
Perhaps we look at the Pinot Noirs.
It was the Couillon. I haven't had it. I've got the Marsanne. It was the Couillon Pinot Noir, wasn't it? Didn't you say?
Couillon and Tocca.
Okay.
And the ladies who shoot their lunch. 3.
Just on that, I'm going to be really cheeky.
The ladies
that Marsanne is one of the best value white wines coming out of Australia.
I agree with you, Victoria, as well. I think it's amazing. I used to work with Thibault many years ago, and it was the time where the consumer just really didn't, from a supermarket point of view, really didn't understand Marsanne at all. So it was a great shame to lose the agency. But I think it is amazing and makes me think I'm going to start buying it. I need to start buying it again.
Yeah. Every time, and it ages beautifully.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. The age would be amazing on it. A bit of age on it would be amazing. So
sorry to talk about Marsanne again, but the biggest issue with it is it's too cheap. And if we saw a wine which wasn't selling, the reason why it didn't sell in that restaurant was it was too cheap. So we unfortunately would quadruple the price. And then it would sell. And I think when we used to sell this, we put it at a much higher price.
Is that why you've retired, Roger? Is that why you've
yes.
retired?
I'm going to tell my sales team this. It's going to be great. They're going to love me. I'm putting the
I'll
prices up by 4 times.
I'll feed that back to Hayley Purbury. I'm sure she'd be delighted to hear that.
But again, isn't it? What is Marsanne to the consumer? How it's all about. I'm sorry, I keep going back to it. It's all about education, communication. Just referring briefly to the style of Chardonnay, the older generation, yes, probably are established. It's communicating, it's educating to the, as Victoria said, the late 20s, 30s about the wines, about the, and going on to Marsanne. What is Marsanne? Now, I think that what M&S and Waitrose have done with their found range and lost and found range is superb, because they're championing lesser known grape varieties. Look at what's happening with Greece at the moment. There is a willingness to learn, but again, it's communication. It's how you get that message. Why? Why buy Marsanne? What is Marsanne? Yeah. And it's all about, I think there is a lot of onus on indies, on the front of house, on indies, on restaurateurs, to actually get that lesson across to their customers, because wine lists are scary, shelves are scary.
Excuse my ignorance, is Marsanne specific to Victoria, or is Marsanne well known in other parts of Australia in terms of where it's grown?
I would say it's Thibault. I mean, Thibault does a great job of many varieties, but it's their signature variety. And they have the largest and oldest single vineyards in the world for Marsanne. So they sort of they would be the most well-known Marsanne producer in Australia, without doubt. So it's very niche.
I guess it demonstrates Victoria's sort of the diversity of what Victoria can do. Sorry. Should we move on to the Pinot Noirs? Are you okay to just show the contrast there between Well, they're two different regions, aren't they? Really, because we've got the Yarra Valley Pinot and the Yarra Mornington Peninsula
Yeah.
Pinot. I mean,
No, we've actually got 3 Pinots. So we've got from Tokar from the Yarra Valley, then the ladies who shoot their lunch, which is Strathbogies, which is a region you're probably not as familiar with.
And then Shiraz in that.
I got Shiraz too.
Sorry?
we got Shiraz actually. Yeah, it's Shiraz.
I got Shiraz, yeah.
Yeah,
Shiraz.
it's just two Pinots.
I got the Pinot. So
It's all right. It's such a diverse panel. We got different wines. It's so diverse.
Yeah, I'll leave that one out then. And then the Kooyong. So Kooyong Ferris from the Mornington Peninsula. So I think they're both great examples of that. Tokar is from the Gruyere sub-region of the Yarra Valley. And as we discussed, Yarra Valley's cool climate has the lowest January temperatures across any wine region in Victoria. So sort of in terms of heading into vintage, it is sort of very much sits in that cool climate space. And the Kooyong Pinot, I've got this here. I think Kooyong's a producer that's been producing exquisite Chardonnays and Pinots for a very long time on the Mornington Peninsula, and very much influenced by that maritime climate. What does everyone think about the comparison between the two?
Just general thoughts on Pinot as well, in terms of if you haven't got the wines there.
If I may, at the Ferris, because that's a single vineyard, and that's something that I think a lot of Victorian producers have been doing, is working either on single clones, mixed clones, but single vineyard. And the Ferris, you can see a lot more warmth to it. It has a depth, and you can see or taste those nuances of terroir. And I know Ferris has quite an iron-rich soil, and you can see that in the wine. But it has some lovely warmth to it. Sorry, I think I've just probably been put on pause.
I know he's moved on now, but I think Sandra Mosley did an amazing job, particularly about 10 years ago, in developing, the individuality of the terroir and of the vineyards for Kooyong generally. I think the Ferris, the name almost reflects the fact that it's that mineral iron rich.
Yeah.
But the styles of, didn't he do, am I right in thinking 3 Pinots?
There were 4.
There were 4.
There are 4 different single vineyards.
Yeah.
Plus the blends from memory. Stephanie helps out.
Yeah.
Yes,
and Sandra Mizell has moved on to 10 Minutes by Tractor, but Glenn Haley is the winemaker now.
Right.
And generally there is at least 4 Pinots from, they start with the Masale for their entry level Pinot, which is a fabulous Pinot, through to the Ferris. Yeah.
Roger, your thoughts on Pinots from Victoria?
Yeah, I mean, Kooyong for us, we had it from the very start. I know Sandra's very well. We stuck to all 4 of the Pinots and all the Chardonnays, which gave people a chance to look at different, and there's a story to give to people, and to have 4 different Pinots from the same vineyard was a huge story in those days to consumers, and it worked very well for us. The first one, the Tokar, is, when I checked the prices, that's a lot cheaper, but it was a nice, fresh, very forward, simple, easy to drink Pinot, where the Kooyong is a bit more serious, and obviously the price is reflected in that. But both great examples of Pinot Noir.
Do you know what's your thoughts on Pinot?
I love them. I mean, for us, despite what I said earlier, Victoria is our most exciting wine growing region. We support 8 producers there. I'd love to double, treble it. I think they produce some of the best Pinot Noir. I think they produce some of the best wines in Australia, quite frankly. But places like the Macedon Ranges, you've got some great producers at Eastern Peak. You've got Josh Cooper up there. It really pushes winemakers to the edge, because it's tough going up there, and it shows absolute talent. So for us, it's really sort of a toss-up between Victoria Pinot and Tassie Pinot. They're absolutely sensational, really Really very, very good indeed. And what we love is you get real vintage variation year on year. The same producer, the same wine is very, very different. 19 to 20. Now we've got some samples of 21. There's a lot of vintage variation. So classically, those wanting at sort of Burgundy vintage variation, Victoria and Tasmania is the place. It's fantastic, definitely.
Excellent.
Can I, my just question, sorry, can I just ask about price point? Because I'm just interested, obviously Pinot sitting very much in a obviously Burgundy price point, comparison on a wine list or in store. How do you think, these price points compete, within that space? Is it end up being, fabulous value? What do you think sort of that positioning with pricing for these wines? Like I have the recommended retail for the Kooyong is 33 and the Tokar is 27 pounds.
I checked that. So the Kooyong is 45. The Wine Society did have it at 39, but it's not available. So the going price on the Kooyong is 45, which is normal. And the other wine, the Tokar, is, as you said, 27. So it's quite a marked difference.
Yeah.
But I think 45 is right for the Kooyong, and anything from Mornington has a price sort of plus, and people expect to pay more.
I mean, is pricing an issue? I mean, I know in the past there's always been a question mark, but I mean, in relation to how prices are of the rest of the world, I mean, is Victoria the prices we're seeing from quite?
It's a premium product, and I think that those are fair prices.
Yeah, I think they offer really good value for money, is what I think. And I think the consumer, it's not going to be your everyday consumer looking for these type of Pinots. It's a certain type of consumer that's going to look for it, that's very happy to pay that type of money for it and will be pleased with what they get. So that would be my view on them, is I think they're both very good value for money.
How do you get the consumer who'll pay over the odds in many cases for Burgundy? And this comes back to my point on education, and Roger, I'm sure you can explain, or any of you can explain, how do you get that message across the consumer that they're actually potentially more likely to get a better wine and better value by buying, be it whichever Pinot Noir, let's stick with Kooyong, than just looking at a wine list and seeing, oh, it's a Gevrey, that'll be good, I'll buy it, when we all know that there are so many rubbish ones around. How do we get that messaging across to the customer, be it in a specialist retail store, be it in a restaurant, be it in a Majestic, or dare I say it, more premium supermarkets? I think that's the big question.
Personally, I think all of our clients, they're sophisticated. They know Burgundy's overpriced, they know Bordeaux's overpriced. You have to educate, but you educate them on regionality, microclimates, on wine producers, but you don't need to educate on price. We don't need to. Proof's in the pudding. They are a sophisticated buyer. Obviously, I can only talk about our clients.
Yes.
But 20% of our new business, or 20% of our business, day in, day out, month in, month out, year in, year out, is organic via all the web engines, essentially through our e-commerce website. And that really sort of just bolsters the position where most wine drinkers at this price point are sophisticated and they know what they want, and they get what they want, essentially. And they've sort of left Burgundy and Bordeaux behind, and it's not their thing. And I suppose a lot of our old clients, or a lot of our current clients, are old school Bordeaux Burgundy clients. And they've left it behind and happy to spend 40 quid comfortably without a blink of an eye on a Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, 45, 50 quid on Cabernet. They don't have a problem with that at all. They really don't.
Yeah. And then I guess the prominence of someone like the Yarra Valley and Mornington Peninsula, it gives it that kind of credibility and backbone, doesn't it, in terms of what they're getting.
I'd also add, Richard, the one thing, the thing about Australian wine, beyond Victoria, is consistency. You only have to look at, the judging that I've done, the number of wines that you taste in a flight, and the Australian ones are always, like, 9 times out of 10 so consistent and so good. that you know that if you have to make an educated guess as to which wine to go for, you'll go for the Australian because you know it's going to be consistent, whereas other countries, not always the case.
Yeah. What, Roger?
Yeah, and I think Stelvin, that's the main thing. People know, especially at home, because if you're at home and you've gone out and bought a couple of special wines for a weekend, Friday night at 8 o'clock, you can't go back to the shop to change it. If it's Stelvin, you know it's no problem. And with a cork enclosure, you still have issues.
I'm just waiting about time. Are we okay just to taste the Shiraz, and then if we have some sort of final thoughts, and we just go over by about 5 minutes, if that's okay. If you want to just perhaps talk about the Shiraz from Victoria, or from Stephanie, do you want to quickly just?
I've actually got the Pinot, but just as a quick, just about, because this is from the Strathbogie Ranges, the ladies that shoot the lunch. It's only 100 k's north of Melbourne, but it's very high. It's 600 metres above sea level, and huge granite sort of boulders in the area. So it's quite a sort of ruggedly beautiful area that with a lot of minerals in it as well. But yeah, as I said, it's quite for where it sits. You wouldn't assume it would be cool climate, but because of the elevation, it is more of a cool climate region.
And they have a great range. This range of wines, I've tasted these before. They're really good concept.
Have a labelling.
Yeah.
Yes, I was about to say it's quite a unique label too. Yeah, absolutely.
It's stand up.
I know you don't have the wines there, but any thoughts on Shiraz from?
I mean, it's the classic, isn't it? It's what everybody wants. We list probably 10. But we have seen the style change over the years, haven't we? So I think that there is more understanding of the breadth of styles that you can get. I think there's more sort of willingness to push up through the price points now, especially in the on-trade. I think that we've gone from seeing it maybe in very high-end premium restaurants to seeing it much more spread across the trade, much more present in casual dining. It's now one of those things that you sort of have to have on your list, at whichever price point you may want to have it at. But it's one of those things that will never have a problem selling at any price point. It's becoming increasingly something that people will have too, even at sort of good food pub. I wouldn't say a gastro pub, but at a decent food pub, you may even see two now.
Yeah. Jamie, is it on the Shiraz for you?
Yeah, no, very much so. I mean, I love selling these wines when I was at Notary, because the names did so much of the talking. And the one thing that I suppose, as far as Shiraz is concerned, we talked about the blockbusters and the 14.5, 15 plus percenters, which are sought out. And I mean, Stuart, it's very interesting to hear the proportion of sales that still fall to the hero variety for Oz, when we know actually that Oz is capable of so much more. And we haven't even touched on the sort of the Mediterranean. It's not a renaissance now, it's well established, but I mean the Italian and Iberian varieties that are doing so well in Victoria, not least. The one thing I would say, which is trickier for producers to pull off, but I saw it brilliantly when I saw a restaurant customer up in Edinburgh, which is Shiraz's with age, and playing into more of a sort of a fine wine angle than a not that these are commoditized, but in a sort of the box ticking. We've got to have a a Shiraz or two or three. There was a guy. It was called the Chart Room in the little Chart Room in Edinburgh, and he had found the most weird and wonderful things, like sort of 15-year-old bottles of Darrenberg and so on, which he'd picked up at auction here, there, and everywhere. Not available for the agents, hadn't been available from the agents for yonks, inevitably. And then he managed to have the best of both worlds, because he had okay, we can't say necessarily that D'Arenberg's wines are, elegant isn't necessarily one of the first words that comes to mind, but in terms of the developed character, the tertiary character, the extra nuances, and some of that boisterous Shiraz character being rather more subdued and contained, was intriguing. And those customers that were lucky enough to buy the whatever 6 or 7 bottles that he bought would have had a treat.
Okay. I'm just aware of my time, Chief.
Yeah, sorry.
It's all right. Sorry to push on.
But,
any other thoughts on Shiraz before we perhaps come to a summary?
From my side of things, this will be that cooler climate style for the average consumer will be a harder ask to definitely get them onto. It's definitely more of a food style, and I think more premium, and there probably is a benefit depending on what happens with duty next year, because obviously that's going to be a big impact on Australia, in particular in reds. But for me and for what we see, there's people that really like those bigger, denser, like Heathcote. If you're looking at Victoria, it would be somewhere like Heathcote with those really rich red soils and everything. So for me, I've always loved this label. I'm a farmer and obviously obsessed with dogs as well, so I've always loved this label. But from a wine style, I don't think it's a style that we'd see too much of in the UK. I think again that denser style is more what we've been trained to drink, for sure.
Our clients like it. They love that savouriness. There's a little lifted freshness to them. They love Barossa, but then Barossa's going through their own sort of in-house education at the moment with Moppa, Moranga. They're teaching locals, even their own team, about their own sort of, the terroir and the microclimates there. But we do fantastically well with cool climate Shiraz. Even though we said a lot of Shiraz, cool climate is right up there, and there's a massive market for it. It's that savoury, it's more food friendly. And with a little bit more bottle age, then you sort of dipping more towards, a Rhone style. And that brings on the sort of the old guard client that we have, and it goes down an absolute treat.
I think what you say, Stuart, about the Rhone style, this is that sort of fresh, it's got lovely freshness. There's a lovely sort of crunchy fruit character to it. And, if you want to, because some Rhones get so Grenache, so heavy and so plummy. And if you want that more Syrah style, more red fruit, this is a really lovely alternative that you're not going to see everywhere. And, if you want to, not so much show off, but just say, hey, look, this is a bit different. I think it's a really lovely little wine.
Definitely.
I think, the cool climate Shiraz, whether it's called Syrah or Shiraz, coming out of Victoria, I think there's some beautiful elegance, and it's such a nice change, and a real step change from your Barossa, McLaren Vale, and so forth.
Yeah,
totally agree. But it's again how you start to put that message across, and that has to be the hand sell. I mean, look, Argentina are doing it pretty well with lighter, fresher, more European style Malbecs from Lujan de Cuyo, Uca Valley. But it's getting that message across about the provenance, about the region, about why it's different.
Maybe the producers need to be doing more on that. Maybe they need to be providing more information on their back labels, or providing.
Yeah, I think that's a key point. I really do. If we look at all the trends going forward, how do people understand the difference between a Barossa Shiraz and a cooler climate Shiraz, unless they are very they are absolute wine.
You've got to be explicit to explain.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we work with one of the best ambassadors. We work with, we're agents for Nick Lakes-Dixon. So his heritage, his Uncle John's blend, his father, his brother is fantastic. But he's sort of left the family motto, and he's gone out, spent a lot of time in Germany. So now obviously he's producing wine in Tasmania. But if you sample Nick's Tassie Syrah, it's fantastic, and he loves putting on tastings, almost sort of head to head with his own family and those traditional styles. And he's an amazing ambassador for literally showing Australia, the locals, the domestic market, how cool climate Syrah can be, but the same for Riesling and Chardonnay as well. He takes a very European approach, and he's a strong advocate. But it actually goes back to one of the earlier questions. It's the winemakers that do all the work. It's not the regional bodies. I think, respectfully, barring the Margaret River, we don't see much in-house work. We have a lot of our winemakers actually complaining that the regional bodies are not helping them at all. It's off their own back. They have the luck of a lot of them having cellar doors. So they're working very, very hard, but they're working hard on the vineyard, cellar door, doing the work. But there's only so many hours in the day. and it's down to sort of regional representation, which is missing.
Okay, great. Well, I'm aware of our time, and I know we've gone over a little bit. So, if we just have a final thought from each of us, just on where, well, just as a general summary of today, really, and what you see is potentially the big opportunity, rather than necessarily looking at the downside, looking at the upside of what Victoria can offer. Roger, can I come to you?
Yeah, I just think that diversity. I mean, it's got everything. You know what, from Marsanne, I mean, sadly we can't call it white Hermitage. That might help sell it. To Stickies and great Chardonnays and Pinots and Syrah. I mean, I see it. Decanter World Wine Awards. Syrah is one of the biggest entries, and this year especially, there was so many great entries. You know, all on the sort of silver level, and it's great to see.
Excellent. Kim?
Yeah, echoing what Roger said, really, it's the diversity of it. And we've talked a lot about the Yarra and Mornington Peninsula today, but we've not talked about like King Valley or, you know, regions like that are, you know, really showing those more Mediterranean varietals as well, that the diversity is huge there. And likewise from the Sticky, we haven't talked about the Campbell's Rutherglen Muscat, which I will just say very quickly is like Christmas in a glass. It's amazing. So yeah.
Oh, yeah, sorry,
yeah, the diversity for me is the one, and value for money as well, compared to some of its, you know, comparing to the European kind of equivalents. The value for money is amazing.
Excellent. Well, the director's cut. We can go into the Muscat. Francis, can I ask you?
I mean, look, the region's got the products. I don't think anybody can disagree with that. It's got a huge breadth of things it can offer to consumers. I just think it needs to be a little bit more organised, and as we've said, there's an education piece to be done, probably by hand selling, really. But it's really encouraging to see these styles of wines. It's really good to sort of know that you can talk so positively about the region as a whole, and it's nice to be able to show that there's depth and breadth in the region.
Excellent. Angela?
6 words: diversity, provenance, quality, value, communication, education.
My word, I should have come to you last. As marvellous.
What's happened to Angela? She never only says 6 words.
Can we do that again? Can you make it 7 words?
She get a T-shirt.
Well, I nearly did 8. I nearly did value for money, so you can have that one as well. But
you can
I'll
put
go
Muscat
with those 6 words.
And Muscat as well.
And that's probably the shortest thing I've ever said. So
I'm a mess. I'm very impressed.
I can do it.
Go on then, Stuart. You have a final say. Not
sure.
your
I think some of the best personalities in Australia that we've worked with, unquestionably some of the best, youngest winemaking talent that we have seen for years coming there. They're not afraid, no sulfur, they're tinker, lots of skin contact. They're pretty fearless, to be honest, really. And agreed with Roger and everybody else. It's so diverse. It's an amazing region, and the most exciting for sure, definitely.
Excellent. And Jamie? You don't unmute yourself, Chief. Come.
There we go. Yeah, I mean, we talked about the desert island, and this is the region within that kind of covers all the bases, isn't it? And capable of doing things at remarkable, the full spread of price points, full spread of packaging styles and winemaking styles. So let's just get these wines out there onto tables, onto shelves, and make sure all these personalities get the coverage and sales they deserve.
Brilliant. Okay, so Victoria, you have your desert island. You've actually got quite a lot of people on your desert island today, but
I do. That's okay. I mean, I've always said, you can say, what would you drink? You know, if there was a last thing, or what's your favorite area? And I've always said Victoria. Okay, I've said France sometimes, but for me, Victoria has everything. And aside from being born in Melbourne, and spending a lot of time with Victorian producers and championing them, 15, 18 years ago in the UK, and I continue to do so as best I can. You know, the combination of the personalities, the consistency, and the diversity, it's it's not just region, it's 21 of them that really should not be overlooked. And I think they shouldn't apologize if they're not wines that can go into supermarkets. These aren't huge volumes, they're much smaller volumes, and maybe their place is just at that more premium end, that higher end for wine drinkers.
Brilliant, thanks a lot. That's excellent. And Stephanie, do you want to give a final thought on what you've heard?
Yeah, well, it's great to hear all those thoughts. It's been a great session that I've really enjoyed. And something that I probably haven't mentioned, I'm sure Victoria and most of you are pretty aware, and I'm not saying this is a bias, but I think part of why the Victorian region, and we have sort of our diversity, obviously because of the, climatic differences, but also, Melbourne is regarded as the food capital of Australia. And so we have a very rich and diverse dining scene in Melbourne, as well as it's a great food bowl in Victoria as well, due to our climate. So it sort of goes hand in hand. And to be honest, a lot of probably the premium wines for Victoria have been being sold in Victoria for a very long time because of that. So I think it's fantastic to hear about the sort of receptiveness of all the cooler climate varieties. And across, and not just cool climate, but the breadth of what we do in Victoria, which is great. So it's great to hear there all the appreciation for the diversity of the region.
Excellent, brilliant. Thanks a lot. Well, thanks everybody for all your time. Appreciate we haven't gone through all the wines in great detail, but I know you can obviously taste them when they arrive or sitting next to you. And for those watching, they'll be, as I say, at the London Wine Fair on the Wine Victoria stand, so you can all get a chance to taste them yourselves. But brilliant panel, thanks a lot. You got such an amazing views. I know we've gone on a little bit more than we said, but there's so much to pack in, and I know we've probably gone on for another half an hour at least. But thanks everybody, and yeah, really appreciate your time. And here's to Wines of Victoria.